We are going to go ahead. Beat me to it. This meeting is going to be recorded, as the friendly robot voice just let you know. We are going to go ahead and start this meeting. This is a meeting regarding a method of distribution amendment to reallocate community development block grant disaster recovery funds for local infrastructure projects here in our Houston-Galveston region. Don't worry, we're going to unpack what that all means, why we're here talking tonight, and where we're going from here, and what we're looking for from you in terms of public comment. Before we get going, I just want to go through a couple real quick housekeeping items for anyone who might be new to the Zoom platform or who may need language interpretation. We do have language and American Sign Language interpretation tonight. I'm going to introduce some of our interpreters and ask that they introduce themselves. If you do need language interpretation, you can access that through the toolbar for Zoom. You either select language interpretation if you're working in a PC environment, or if you are using a mobile device, there should be a 3-dot expanded menu option. If you select that, you can reach language interpretation in that way. So our interpreters tonight, we have 2 American Sign Language interpreters, Whitney Corbett and Heather Moore. Whitney, if you wouldn't mind starting us off and introducing yourself.
Yes, hi, I'm Whitney Corbett. I'm one of the sign language interpreters.
Thank you, Whitney. Heather, if you wouldn't mind doing the same.
I am Heather Moore, sign language interpreter.
Thank you, Heather. We also have both, we have Spanish, Mandarin, and Vietnamese interpretation tonight. I'll start with Mr. Gonzalo Lagos. Would you mind introducing yourself and letting folks know in Spanish how to access the language interpretation?
Good evening, buenas noches. My name is Gonzalo Lagos. Mi nombre es Gonzalo Lagos y tienen ahí la opción de interpretación en español para que todo pueda aparecer en nuestro idioma. Gracias. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. For Mandarin translation, we have Ms. Mindy Lee. Mindy, if you wouldn't mind doing the same, introducing yourself and letting folks know how to access translation.
Of course. 你们好，我叫 Mindy Lee， 我是你的中文翻译。那如果你需要中文翻译的话呢，你看到这里有这个写着语言这边，你打进去，你就可以找到下面有3个点的，然后你按进去，你找到中文就可以了。谢谢。
Thank you so much. And lastly, there's Rose. Rose Duan, would you mind introducing yourself and letting folks know how to access the Vietnamese interpretation? Rose, are you able to hear us? You may be on mute if you can. Okay, I'll try that again in a minute, see if we can get her back online. H-GAC.
I can hear you.
Rose, thank you so much. Would you mind introducing yourself in your interpreted language and just letting folks know that if they need to get Vietnamese interpretation, they just select language interpretation in the toolbar.
You mean in my language, right?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Xin giới thiệu với quý vị, tên tôi là Rose Dawn. Tôi là thông dịch viên tối hôm nay. Nếu quý vị nào cần để dịch ra tiếng Việt thì tôi sẽ giúp đỡ cho quý vị. Xin cảm ơn. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. I appreciate that. And just again, real quickly, to reiterate, this meeting is being recorded. While we're giving a real brief presentation at the start, the microphones and chat will be muted except for our interpreters. But those will be brought back online for the majority of this meeting, which is intended to be a conversation, an informational meeting, to allow you to ask questions and for us to have a conversation about what we're talking about tonight. You can use the chat and pretty much any other function. It'll be on the toolbar if you're using on the computer. Closed captioning is available for this meeting. It is enabled. You can go ahead and disable it with the live transcript button if you wish to. And similarly, on a mobile device, you're going to look for the 3-dot expanded menu button and make the same. You can either choose chat or disable, enable the transcript, the closed captioning with view full transcript. So just to make sure you all were comfortable with the Zoom environment, That will bring us to the actual meat of our meeting tonight. I wanted to welcome you. My name is Justin Bauer. I am a principal planner with the Houston-Galveston Area Council. We are the 13 County Council of Governments, and we serve as a regional planning organization. You can see our area in the slightly darker gray to the right of the text here. That serves the Houston area and Galveston area and as part of the Upper Texas Gulf Coast. So to give you a little background about what we're talking about tonight and what action we're looking to accomplish, as anyone who was either here in 2017 or has come here since knows, Hurricane Harvey really caused an unprecedented amount of damage to our region. As part of the federal and state response, there was an allocation of money in 2018 of about $130 million from the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds, specifically for part of their local infrastructure program. These funds are federal funds that are part of a much broader federal response. You've probably heard us talk about other responses to Hurricane Harvey, other funding sources. These originate with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, at the federal level. They're managed at the state level by the Texas General Land Office. I did want to make sure, just because I know there are some people on the line who have been an active part of discussions we've had recently about another set of federal funds that were a response to Hurricane Harvey. These were Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Funds. Those funds are forward-looking. They look to increase our resilience. The funds we're talking about tonight are disaster recovery funds. So they're tied to actual impacts of the storm. And this dates back to this process originated in 2018. So if you're wondering why we're amending something we just completed, we're not. We're dealing with this older set of funds from 2018, both, again, part of that much broader federal response to Hurricane Harvey, both coming from a similar source, but for slightly different purposes. The Houston-Galveston Area Council, as the council of governments for our area, helped the General Land Office determine how these $130 million of disaster recovery funds for local infrastructure should be allocated in our region. Part of the Community Development Block Grant Program for these funds vests this sort of decision-making at the local level to a large degree. The wisdom there is that local governments, our local communities, best understand how they were impacted in a storm and what they really need those funds to go to. In order for GLO to understand that and make sure the money gets where it needs to go, they work with councils of government like H-GAC. And the way we assisted was to work with our local governments and our local community members to develop what's called a method of distribution. And a method of distribution is very much like what it sounds. It's a way of distributing that $130 million within our region. And the MOD is essentially a plan. And that plan for distribution talks about how we're going to allocate those funds, who they're going to go to, what they're going to be used for, and any restrictions that come along with those funds. Specific to our method of distribution, when our board of directors and our local governments discussed this back in 2018, we talked about who the eligible entities were. So for this funding source, the eligible entities were primarily cities and counties, so local governments within our region. The eligible uses, again, putting this in the context that this is part of a much broader federal response. This is one specific set of funds with a specific purpose. So as opposed to some programs that dealt with housing or other aspects of the recovery, these funds were designed, as their name implies, to deal with impacts to local infrastructure. So impacts that may have happened to our flood mitigation infrastructure, to our water and wastewater utilities. Those are the eligible uses that exist within our method of distribution. And our method of distribution didn't limit that in any way. We essentially used the eligible uses that are part and parcel of this funding source in general. Because these are community development block grant funds, they're aimed at, by their very nature, at our most vulnerable communities. They are designed to help our economically disadvantaged communities, and some of the requirements that come along with these funds reflect that. So as reflected in our method of distribution, but really specific to the funding source itself, there's a 70% requirement. So that 70% low and moderate income requirement. So that means of our funding, at least 70% has to benefit low and moderate income populations. And that's a way that we make sure that these funds are really getting to projects that benefit our most vulnerable communities, those communities that were most impacted by these storms. I'm going to add a caveat here, just because this has come up in some of the questions we've had about this process. We've had questions, well, why is Harris County and Houston not included in that method of distribution? And I want to make it clear that unlike some of the other federal response pieces we've worked on, This method of distribution, this allocation was very specific at the state level. So these are not decisions that the Houston-Galveston Area Council made or our board of directors made. This has to do with the way the General Land Office set up these funds to begin with. So there was an allocation made to Harris County and an allocation made to the city of Houston. And then there was essentially an allocation made to the rest of the region. So Harris County and city of Houston were not excluded by H-GAC originally from this method of distribution. That's just the way it was set up at the state level. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, because as we began talking about the amendment that we're going to discuss tonight, the reallocation of some funds, I want to make it clear that even if it was our intent to include Harris County and the city of Houston in that, which is not the intent, we wouldn't be able to do that simply because that's not the way it was set up at the state level. They weren't excluded by any means. Their funding was just treated separately from this method of distribution. So in terms of what we're here to talk about tonight, when our board of directors originally approved this method of distribution and all the nuance it entails, they looked forward and said, we are going to need a method to reallocate any funds that may not be used, whether that's because the local government we allocated funds to simply declined them, they just didn't think they would have projects, or those funds just ended up not being used or were de-obligated. We needed a way to take those funds that were left over, essentially, and put them back into use for our communities. So our board approved and discussed with our local governments and our community and approved a reallocation methodology. And we'll talk a little bit about what that methodology is in a bit. And we submitted that along with our method of distribution. At that time, when the Texas General Land Office reviewed our overall method of distribution, they declined to formally approve or disapprove that reallocation methodology. So it's not formally part of our method of distribution yet. And I'm not going to speak for our colleagues at Texas General Land Office as to the whys and wherefores, but I think it's certainly understandable that, at the very start of our process, not knowing how much you're going to need to reallocate or how that process is going to play out, it's likely that revisiting it now when we have a much better sense of that makes sense, and we're in a better position to devise a methodology now that we know essentially what we need to reallocate. So as it turns out, of that $130 million that we allocated in our region to the various local governments, only about $2.3 million in funds were declined or de-obligated. And that represents the total allocations to 10 communities in our region. Because there was some of those funds left over, that $2.3 million, we're now in the process of needing to reallocate that, wanting to make sure that that $2.3 million isn't left on the table, that it goes out to our communities as it was intended to help us deal with the lingering impacts of Hurricane Harvey. In order to do that, we need to formally amend that method of distribution. So that method of distribution, as well as being a plan, it's a formal document that sets forth how that money is going to be allocated and how GLO is going to work with our local governments to work on projects. So for us to put that $2.3 million back into play, as our local communities intended and as they discussed it, we need to formally amend our method of distribution. The intent is to add the existing reallocation methodology. So going back to what our board of directors and our local governments talked about, what our local communities felt was fair. All of these decisions, all these allocations were based on a data-driven approach, on a formula-driven approach, was as objective as possible. So the intent is to use that reallocation methodology and ask GLO to formally approve that. So let me take a step back for a second and talk about what is that reallocation methodology? How are we proposing to spend that $2.3 million, or how are we proposing to allocate that out to our local communities? It's actually a fairly simple two-step process. So the intent was to keep any funds that were declined or de-obligated that weren't able to be used, allocated again as close as possible as we could to the area where we originally allocated those funds. So, for example, if a city declined funds, the first step in our process would be to offer those funds to that city's respective county. So to give a real world example, if hypothetically the city of Sugar Land, which is in Fort Bend County, said, we just don't think we can hit that low to moderate income threshold. We just don't have any applicable projects. We're going to decline those funds. Now, several years later, we need to put those funds back into play. The first step would be go to Fort Bend County and say, Fort Bend County, we have this amount of funds that were declined by the city of Sugar Land. If you have projects that can meet these requirements, we are offering them to you now to put back into your communities. And so that first step is to offer all those 10 communities funds back to their respective counties. Now, if one or more of those counties decline those funds, just did not think they would be able to have projects or meet the requirements, then we go to the second step. So I said there's a two-step process. The first step, it goes to their respective counties. And the second step is using a hierarchical list. So when we anticipated that one or more of those counties might not be able to use those funds, we said we need a way to prioritize our local governments so that we have a backup. We have a way to get those funds back out to those communities. And we wanted to highlight those communities that had the greatest need. So we developed a ranked list of local governments, both cities and counties. And it was ranked by essentially their relative amount of damage they incurred to their housing units. So the largest percentage of housing units that were claiming damage within their area, with a minimum, they had to have had at least 5,000 units damaged. But this was a way of saying and identifying those communities that had the largest impacts during Harvey relative to their size, and making sure that we started there first, where we had the greatest need. To give you sort of a more visual sense of what we're talking about, and I apologize, I know some of the text here is a little small. If you start on the left-hand side, this table is the 10 communities that declined or had de-obligated funds that totaled that 2.3 million and their respective counties. So the first step, the county of origin, is to offer the cumulative amount. So there's 5 communities in Fort Bend County. We offer Fort Bend County the cumulative amount from all those communities. And if those counties accept that money and are able to put that in play, the process is done. We've reallocated those monies. They're going back into their local community. The counties can use those funds for those communities if they chose to, or for other areas of the counties. But we've put those funds back into their intended use. If one or more of those counties, as I mentioned, is not able to use those funds or decline those funds, then we go to that second piece. And that's the last table on the right. This is the damage hierarchy, the prioritized list. So for example, if Fort Bend County was not able to use those funds, we would go to the first entity on that list, which is the city of Dickinson, and say, we have $1,187,302 that carries these restrictions and stipulations and uses with it. Are you able to use that? If they are not, then we would proceed to the next person on the list, and so on. And that's a way of making sure that if we aren't able to reallocate all those funds in the first step, we have a backup, and we can make sure that those funds are going to highly impacted communities. So as part of this process, as part of this amendment process that we need to go through in order to put this reallocation methodology into action, we have a public comment process, which makes sense and is certainly appreciated because we developed this method of distribution with our local governments, with our local communities. It only makes sense that now that we want to make a change, even though it was already discussed and agreed upon when the method distribution was originally put into practice, it makes sense that we go back out to our communities as we're doing tonight and as we'll continue to do to ensure that what we're proposing, the amendment we're proposing, still meets the community's needs, still meets the intention that we had then, and it still reflects the priorities and needs that we have now. One thing I do want to make clear when I start talking about the opportunities for you to add public comment, for you to be part of the process, is that we are not taking formal public comment tonight. And that's really just because of the format of this meeting. We held this meeting because we wanted to give people an opportunity to ask questions, to provide us feedback, to have a conversation. It is not a formal process. So if you have, after tonight, if you said, that really answers a question for me, I think I know what I want to add, or I have a much better sense now, I want to add formal public comment. I want my comment to be part of the record. I want this to be part of the decision-making process. Then there's a lot of options we have for you. We just need we need you to use one of those and not just assume because you said it tonight that it's going to be part of the record. First and foremost, we are having a formal public hearing. So on December 6th, 2022, from 5:30 to 7:30, here at H-GAC offices, or I should say at H-GAC offices, I'm obviously not there right now, we will be having a formal public hearing. As with tonight, there will be an online option. So if you cannot be there in person, that is fine. You can still be there and participate online. And again, as tonight, we will have translation services available. One thing I did want to mention for anyone who may not have been part of a formal public hearing before, it's a little different than what we're doing tonight. So at a formal public hearing, we take comment from the public, but we're not allowed to answer questions and we're not allowed to engage. We're not allowed to have a conversation with you. It really is just designed to be a forum for the public to give us their comment, for us to receive it and subsequently consider it, but we can't engage with you. So if you have questions, please ask them tonight or please follow up with us. Just be aware that formal public hearing won't be an opportunity to have that back and forth. But we do, we highly recommend you come and hear the other comment or enter and make your voice heard. If you're not available that night, there are a plethora of other options that are available to you. All of them are on our website. And the website link is at the bottom of the page. Before you start scribbling frantically, this website link will be posted throughout our conversation that we're going to have tonight. So don't worry, it's going to be available. And that website has all the information that's on the screen. But just wanted to let you know, you can use the online form on the website. You can email us. You can call us and leave a message. You can mail it. And if you happen to be in Greenway Plaza, we always welcome folks to stop by and drop off their comments personally. Any of those avenues will make sure that your comment is part of the public record and goes to our board for their consideration. Again, more information about the original development of the method of distribution, everything we're talking about tonight, and all the options you have for public comment are all on that website. So if you're new to this process, you have questions that aren't answered tonight or things that you think about, please visit the website. It's just got a wealth of information. To let you know where we go from here, following the public comment period after December 15th, staff is going to accumulate all the comments we receive from the public, whether it's at the hearing or any of the other resources that are available to you. And we're going to bring these to our board of directors. And just for anyone who may not have worked with Houston-Galveston Area Council before, our board of directors are not staff members. They are elected representatives and other representatives of all the local governments throughout our 13-county region and other interests. So they represent you. They are the region. It is a regional body. So it's not just one organization that's going to be making this decision. It is really a regional decision, which is what is intended with these funds. The board of directors will consider all the comments they receive. They will discuss, I'm sure, as well on their own behalf and potentially take action on the proposed amendment. And just to be clear again, to reiterate, the proposed amendment we're talking about tonight is to these community development block grant disaster recovery funds for the local infrastructure program. And what we're proposing to change about our original method of distribution is to formally reiterate that reallocation methodology, that two-step reallocation methodology, to make sure that that leftover 2.3 million goes back out to our communities and is put to use. If the board of directors approves the amendment, approves the revised method of distribution, we will submit that to the Texas General Land Office. The Texas General Land Office will review that, and I'm going to speak a little bit speculatively. I'll say they will approve the proposed amendment after we've made any necessary revisions. And at that point, the recipients of the funding, the recipients of the reallocated funding will go back out and work directly with the Texas General Land Office to get those projects into play, to get them approved, to develop them and implement them. And that's really where the important work begins. To get there, though, we've got to go through this process, this formal process to propose and have the amendment accepted. So that is really the presentation portion of the meeting tonight. Hopefully that was mercifully brief. We really wanted to put the focus on your questions and this conversation. As I mentioned, throughout this process, we will have at the bottom of the screen the website address available so you can visit later. You can access all the ways that you can give us public comment, that you can make your voice heard. We will be here through 7:30. So whether or not there's continuing conversation, whether or not there's continuing questions, we will be here, even if we're not on video. So we invite anyone who comes in the meantime or comes back. Maybe you went and had a great thought over dinner and popped back in the meeting. Just unmute and introduce yourself, or use the raise hand feature or the chat feature. We will be here to answer those questions. But in the meantime, I'm excited to hear your questions. I'm excited to have this conversation. For the first part, if you wouldn't mind using the raise hand feature or putting your question in chat, we have staff members who are watching that. They will either invite you to unmute yourself and say your question if you use the raise hand feature, or we'll be happy to read your question in chat, and we'll try to answer those in the order that they're received. So with that, I will go ahead and open this up to your questions and comments.
Hi, Justin. I don't know. Can y'all hear me?
We can. Is this Christy?
It is. Hi, how are
Excellent.
you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm good. I have a question about the factors being used to determine which communities beyond the selected counties that could be considered for a reallocation. Are there any other factors being used besides the, I guess the building damage or structural damage amounts?
So I'm going to turn that question over to Dr. Pramod Sambidi, one of our colleagues who is involved in the data work on this, to make sure I don't misstate something and make sure my understanding is correct. Pramod, are you with us?
Yes, Justin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Right. Hi, Christy. So for this mod or methodology, method of distribution, we used FEMA's individual assistance housing registrants large disaster data. So it's basically damages to the housing units, and depending on the level of damage or amount of damage, we categorize them into minor, low, minor, high, major, low, major, high, and severe categories, and weighted them and use that for our method of distribution. and then this formula and everything is available on our website in PDF as well as Excel format.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to tack on to that, Christy, one of the as with the other community development block grant programs we work with, some of the underlying guidelines and guidance we have in terms of how we develop our formulas and how we develop our approach to prioritizing things and allocations really generally rely on using objective data, sort of universal data, verifiable data, trying to make things as data and formula driven as possible, and to account for the fact that we as a region are pretty varied. We have an incredibly large difference in scale between our largest governments and our smallest governments, and trying to find ways with our data to reflect sort of the differing needs across all those communities in a way that's as objective as possible.
Barbara McIntyre has raised her hand. Barbara, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, good evening. I am Barbara McIntyre, and I'm the Executive Director of Liberty County Long-Term Recovery Committee. We are LTRC, and we are the ones who are trying to do some home repairs in Liberty County, and we are so desperately in need. So is this going to be something that the LTRC can apply to do? Because we're actually one of the only ones in our county that's doing the home repairs. We're working with Texas General Land Office, and we were able to, for Harvey, we were able to secure 455 applicants, but they were only able to do 173 of those 455, and we don't actually have a list of who they are, but we worked as case managers. We have 4 case managers that we're working with, and so we pretty much know who applied. We're waiting for them to give us a list. So is that something we will be able to do, or is this something the county has to do?
This would have to go through your county or local government. So the way that this specific, and again, just to thank you for the opportunity to clarify this. This specific piece of that broader federal response to Harvey, the eligible entities for these funding are the local governments. So we don't take direct applications from other groups. When we allocated the money, it was to those local governments. So what I'd recommend is first and foremost, reaching out to the county finding out their plans for other funds in general. These specific funds are aimed at local infrastructure projects, but as I've said more than once, this is part of that broader response, and there are other programs specifically aimed at housing. We would also be more than happy to help facilitate a conversation or an introduction if you're not sure who you need to talk to or could use help setting up that conversation. We're happy to have that offline conversation and see how we can assist you. But for this specific funding program, yes, it is specifically allocations to those local governments.
Thank you. I was under the impression every time I read it, that's what I understood, but I guess I didn't understand why I kept getting the email. So I was thinking something else is happening. Maybe there is some language in here that I'm not able to comprehend. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I will have some more questions later.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sylvester Reeder has raised his hand. Sylvester, ask your question. Unmute yourself first, sorry.
I'm Sylvester Reeder with Houston One Voice, and Justin just answered my question. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mr. Reeder.
Peggy Zahler has raised her hand. Peggy, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Evening, Peggy.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, and thanks to the staff for supporting this activity. Justin, when do you envision this going to the board? And then once that approval takes place, what would be an anticipated time for the entities to start the discussions with GLO?
So the first part of that question is a little easier than the second part, to be quite honest. We anticipate taking this to our board in January. So like I said, we anticipate our public comment process to go through mid-December, and then we'll have some time to compile all those comments and bring them to our board for their consideration. So we'll be looking at the January meeting. We intend to turn it around and resubmit it to GLO, assuming our board approves as quickly as we can. So we don't want there to be any delay on our side. Texas General Land Office will need to review this and either ask us for revisions or approve it. That process, we don't have a good sense on how long that will take. I want to be careful not to prognosticate or speak on behalf of Texas General Land Office. We think this is a fairly simple addition and a fairly simple amendment. The language that we're referring to with the method of distribution that sets up this process for reallocation is in fact already part of the documents. Essentially what we're asking them to do is, now that we have the actual numbers, to approve that. So I don't anticipate there's a lot that would be new or would generate a lot of questions and revisions, but again, I can't speak for GLO, and that would really be the question there, is how long they need for their review process. After they go through their review process, then they would need to work directly with those local governments. So really, I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's really going to depend on the GLO side on how long they take for review. We anticipate getting it to them as quickly as we can after that board action.
Okay, thank you. Justin, are there any, I know the cost associated with disaster recovery, are there any specific costs that will not be allowed that we know of?
Absolutely. And Peggy, why don't you and I set up a conversation offline, and I can go through some of the detail and the nuance. I want to make sure I don't misstate anything. I want to sure we can sit down with the documents in front of us. We talk a little bit about some of the specific restrictions, both in the method of distribution as well as the enabling documents on GLO side. And we may have to follow up with GLO and ask some of those questions on your behalf. But I'm happy to sit down with you and go through that.
Well, if that information is in the document, I can take the responsibility to review it. I just have not read them in depth. So I'll take a look and then get back with you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Gwyneth Teves has raised her hand. Gwyneth, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Evening, Gwyneth.
Good afternoon. So I do have a question as far as if for any reason that allocation did roll all the way through until it did get to the counties, is there any consideration for those counties, for instance, if it got down to Wharton County and they were going to turn back any of those funds, to consider the cities in that county that would be eligible before rolling it down?
So that is certainly a point of feedback we can take. Currently, this is what the board of directors had discussed with their local governments and communities back during the original development of the method of distribution. We don't, and again, I'm being very careful because I don't want to speak on behalf of any of the entities involved. Our current understanding is it is likely that the first step will be the end of this process, that the counties will receive those funds. I'm not speaking on behalf of the counties. We have not asked for a formal indication at any point, but our informal understanding is it's likely that the counties will be able to use those funds. If they don't, it would have to go through that whole 14 entity process to get to the end down in Walker. At that point, that is a good question. If it had gone through that whole process and gone through all those entities and there's still funding left over, what would be the case in that? And at that point, I think we need to revisit it with Texas General Land Office unless we receive public feedback and our governments, as part of our board of directors, discuss that eventuality. That is certainly something we can bring up during the discussion with board. If we receive public feedback, that would be a good idea to do. So
okay, thank you.
That's a long way of saying, if you think that's a consideration that needs to be made, I would suggest putting in a public comment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Justin, I don't see any more questions in the chat or any more raised hands.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, to everyone who's still with us, I want to thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I hope you'll consider putting in public comment. We want to make sure that, again, as with all these sort of projects, that they best reflect our local communities. You are absolutely free to stick with us for the duration of the meeting, but not seeing any other public comments, you are also obviously free to go about, give you back a little bit of the rest of your evenings, and again, just with our appreciation. So unless we have any other comments right now, I'll go ahead and we will just go offline for a moment, but we are here, we are ready to answer your questions. Just please speak up and let us know. Commissioner Henry, I apologize. I see your hand up. For some reason, it didn't pop to the front of my screen. I was just scrolling through and I saw your hand up. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to be clear. This money cannot be used for any infrastructure flooding. Can that be used for that or not? Well, and I'm talking about roads.
Yeah, so this is the infrastructure portion. So when this method of distribution was originally developed, there were essentially two aspects. There was a housing-based aspect and this local infrastructure project. And I'm going to pull up the actual method of distribution in front of me, just to make sure I don't misspeak on any of the nuance. But
that's what I first thought, but I've only heard discussion about housing, so I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, and I apologize. So this specifically, all this reallocation, and thank you for the opportunity to reiterate this. This is about that local infrastructure piece. The 130 million was specific to that local infrastructure.
Okay, well, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you, Andrea Tantillo with our staff. Just put the link to the information in the chat. So if you haven't scribbled it down on your own, feel free to simply click on that. Thank you, Andrea. That'll take you to the full documentation. And as I mentioned with Peggy and some of our other participants, I am more than happy to have a conversation if you have questions, if you're not sure where to find information, or if you need further clarification on any of the nuance. This was developed back in 2018. So obviously, we've had to refresh it on our side, refresh our understanding. We're happy to help you as well as you go through this process. And I apologize, I was remiss in saying, I know we have, Commissioner Henry and some of our other local leaders on the line. What I should have said at the very start was, I think it's telling that of $130 million that we allocated out to communities in our region, only 2.3 came back as unable to be used. So what we probably should have started was to say thank you. This is built on the basis of your success. We thank you for being able to put these funds into good use out in your communities. We are very excited to be able to continue to track this sort of federal and state investment in our region, and your success and your work to put these funds helps us build our case and helps us build the notion that we are a good investment, that helping our recovery helps build a strong local economy, a strong and resilient set of communities, and that we will continue to lead the nation in many of these respects. So thank you very much. Okay, Sarah, could you just confirm I don't see any other hands raised or anything else?
I don't see any hands raised or questions, but Barbara McIntyre posted in the chat. Thank you for the clarifications.
Absolutely. All right. Well, not hearing anything else right now. As I mentioned before, we are going to be here through the entirety of the posted time. I will be here till 7:30. I am going to go ahead and go off camera and leave you with the screen. Invite any of our interpreters or staff to do so as well if you choose to. If anyone is stuck with us to this point, wish you a good evening. You're certainly welcome, like I said, to stick around and hear any further comment. But we want to make sure we give you as much time as we can. So I'm going to stop talking at you now. And thank you again and wish you a good evening, and look forward to hearing your comments.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is TT Smith from the city of Texas City. And I was not able to see the presentation, and I was wondering if there was a PowerPoint that I could look at.
Absolutely. And we have, my name is Justin Bauer. I'm a principal planner here at Houston-Galveston Area Council. We just finished up the presentation and some of the comments, but we are here till 7:30. So I'm happy to talk to you about what we presented tonight. I'll be happy to make a copy of that presentation available to you.
Okay.
And answer any questions that you have.
Okay.
So I'll give you just a real quick sort of the elevator pitch, and then you let me know how I can expand. So the reason we had the public meeting tonight, we were talking about an allocation of funds, some federal funds that were made back in 2018 as part of the federal response to Hurricane Harvey. These specific funds were Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds. So they're tied to impacts from Hurricane Harvey, specific to impacts on local infrastructure. So things like, flood infrastructure, water, wastewater, utilities, that sort of thing. The funding had been allocated to our local governments, and it's been out working and doing good in the communities. After a couple of years, we reassessed where everything was, and there are about $2.3 million that haven't been used, either because the local governments couldn't use that, couldn't meet the requirements of the program, or the funds were simply left over, weren't able to be used. And so we are going through this process because we want to put that 2.3 million back out into the community to have its intended purpose. And in order to do that, we have to amend what's called our method of distribution, which is essentially the plan for how these monies are used and allocated. And so we work with the Texas General Land Office. They're the state agency who is managing these federal funds. So we're in that process. This is part of our public comment process. And essentially what we're anticipating doing, and based on what public comment we get and what our board of directors discusses, is back when they originally came up with this plan, with this how we're going to use these federal funds. They said, we're going to use a pretty simple two-step process. If there's any funds that are left over, we're going to give them to the county that city is located in. So the example I gave in the meeting was, if City of Sugar Land declined their funds, we would offer those to Fort Bend County first.
Okay.
If any of the counties weren't able to use those funds, then we have a prioritized list of local governments that includes both cities and counties, because cities and counties are the eligible entities. They're the folks who can actually receive funding under this program. And so we would go down this rank list, and the list is based on how much relative damage those local governments had. So for example, City of Dickinson is was ranked number one because of the percentage of housing units that were damaged during Hurricane Harvey. And so if there was money left over from the counties, we would go to the City of Dickinson and say, we've got hypothetically $1 million. Here's the restrictions that carries with it. Here's what it can be used for. Do you think you have projects you can use this for? If Dickinson said yes, we're done. If not, it'll go down to the next entity on that list and so on.
Okay.
The intent is to, we've got this small, it was $130 million originally. Most of that has been put to good use. We've got this small amount of about $2.3 million that are left, but we don't want to leave it on the table. We want it to get out there into the communities and getting put to good work. So we have a public comment process that we have to go through to do that. And I say have to, it makes a lot of sense to, it's been several years since 2018. So we're reaching back out to the communities to say, hey, y'all talked in 2018 that this is how you wanted to use any, reallocate any unused funds. Is that still good? Does that still meet your goals and priorities? And assuming that's the case, just hypothetically, we'll bring this back to our board of directors who represent all the 13 counties. And we'll say, we would like to formally amend this method of distribution, submit that up to the state for their review. If we get approvals on both ends, that means then the entities who receive the funding can start working with Texas General Land Office on new projects. So that'll be the process. So we're going to have a lot of different public comment options. If you see on your screen, I don't know if you're joining us on mobile or desktop or what, there's a link to our website.
Yes.
And on the website, you has all the information in terms of how you can, if you wanted to comment on this process, how you can make a comment, whether you email or use a form or come to a public hearing, et cetera, et cetera. All that information's on that website, as well as just like a wealth of all the information you could ever want about how this process, happened before, back in 2018, why we're doing what we're doing, what this money can be used for, that sort of thing. So that's several years of planning in a very encapsulated speech. So if you have questions, I'm happy to dig in with you and get you some answers.
Well, thank you very much for that synopsis. I will, and in fact, I had already sent a message to our Public Works Director to ask him if he thought there would be any projects that may qualify for these type of funds, but I haven't heard back from him yet. So I will circle back to him and also the mayor and the emergency manager and see if they have any comments or requests in regards to this after we look over the website and anything else that you may send.
Sounds great. If there's anything we can do to answer questions in the meantime, just please let me know.
Okay, will do. Thank you
Great to
so
have you
much.
online tonight.
All right.
Justin, we have a question posted in the chat by Christy Hadnot. They asked, can these funds be used for planning activities associated with infrastructure improvements?
That is a great question. I am going to go to the official documentation just to make sure I don't misspeak, because the planning as an activity is handled a little different in some of these different pieces of the federal response. So if you bear with me, Christy, for just a moment, I'm going to bring that up just to make sure I don't misstate this.
She just added an additional comment that she didn't see it in the original 2018 mod.
Christy, I will go ahead and confirm that and get back to you if you don't want to hang out longer tonight. Otherwise, just give me a moment. I'm going to go back and our mod lists the eligible activities for that local infrastructure portion of the funds. But it's typically talking about the specific concrete activities. The planning is sometimes something we refer back to in terms of the enabling documentation from the state, the action plan at the Texas General Land Office level. So I am going to bring that up and research that while we're here and waiting. But if you don't want to wait, that's absolutely fine. We have your contact information, and I'll make sure I get an answer to you. And if any of our staff members are online and have a recollection from that original process that is escaping me, please feel free to interject. Otherwise, I'm going to make sure I get a proper answer.
Justin, Christy just posted thanks. She'll hang out for a few minutes in case anyone else on her end has questions.
It didn't go through. I quit.
Patrick, did you have a question?
He answered the question.
Yeah, Patrick, I apologize. I was trying to get you into the chat while I was answering somebody else's private question as well. Sorry about that.
You know, I would assume that engineers or someone experienced in doing cost estimates would do that.
Yeah. And typically, when the local entities work with Texas General Land Office, they can give you a lot more information on specifically what cost categories they need broken out on their side. That would happen directly between General Land Office and who's actively doing the project.
I think that answered the question. Thank you.
I apologize. I should mute myself so you're not hearing me click and clack on the type as I'm trying to answer these questions. All right, folks, by my clock, it is 7:30. I appreciate you hanging in there. We are officially done. So thank you to our interpreters. Thank you very much to the staff. Appreciate you guys hanging into the bitter end. We are ready to go ahead and shut this down.
Thank you, Justin. Great job.
Thank you all so much.